forgot my glasses, so somebody's running upstairs to get them. Tonight I wanted to kind of branch off a little bit, so I'm not going to go so much into the text directly, but I wanted to take one idea or concept from the text and then sort of illustrate it with some stories. And the idea, as I squint at this, is on, oh my, what page is?
112. 112. 112.
112?
Yeah.
So on 112, 113, that's where we are. I think, yeah. No. Those, they're in a black, well, let's see. These will kind of work. Okay, that's okay. I found these on the street, and I thought they were real fine, but they're all scratched up. So it's like, anyhow, but they do magnify a little bit. So I'll try to get through with these tonight. Huh?
We can read if you tell us what.
Or would you like?
Well, I've got some other material I want to read for you. You know, I could all bring you up here and we could all sit around the the podium here and work on it. The light's okay. It's really funny. These glasses are sort of scratched in the center on the side, so it's like right where you would be looking. But they're a good magnification. I'm sure they're just cheapos, but okay. Anyhow, oh, thank you. That helps. Okay. So, in this exchange, and I was talking about this last week, I was making an argument. I was not arguing, I was making an argument from these texts as I read them, and from within their own understandings as they present them to us. This teaching of the Dharma is not bound by, oh, great, thank you. Oh my, these are much better. This teaching coming from the text is presented as not having historical parameters or limitations, not having cultural limitations. So time and space and place, however you want to talk about those, are said to be the conditions within which the Dharma arises. And the Dharma then responds to and works through those conditions, but is not bound by those conditions, is not rooted coming out of those. So that's why it's said the eternally abiding or the eternally dwelling. It's meant to be going on through time, through place, through people, and in fact through all realms of living beings, what are called the 10 Dharma realms. So the whole span of existence, from the hells and animals up to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Now, that being said, the next level is that what constitute Dharma is not a fixed body of procedures or teachings, but rather is some deep principles that have to do with a recognition that all living beings have the ability or the potential to become fully awakened, to become Buddha. And therefore, the teachings are only meant and designed to activate this intrinsic nature. In other words, more like remove those obstacles or impediments or habitual tendencies or misperceptions, avidya, that prevent that from manifesting. So the teachings then are expedient devices or liberative tools to unlock or open up that potential. And then what constitutes a teaching is that which does that. It's almost pragmatic in the sense that if it is to that particular situation and that person and those conditions or that malformation, it straightens that out. It is a teaching. And so it can be across a range, a variety, a diversity. And sometimes scholars have puzzled over this because they seem to think that when they find one teaching that's specific in this way and seems to be contradicted by a teaching in another, that this shows an inconsistency. But rather, the teachings themselves suggest this isn't an inconsistency, but an appropriateness or a relevancy to the situation, and that what would be taught in one situation wouldn't necessarily be a teaching in another situation because either the person wasn't ready, the situation wasn't ideal, or something like that. So this text also goes into this. He says earlier, I don't have any teaching, I simply untie knots and call it teaching. And there, what he's saying is a repetition of what I just said, but in a much clearer and succinct way. He calls the afflictions or the coverings or the impediments that keep us from realizing our nature knots. I mean, he uses a very graphic Anglo-Saxon idea, knots, a rope that's tied into knots, and therefore not its full length and not able to be used without twists and turns and impediments. In the Shurangama Sutra, it's very interesting, the Buddha also uses the idea of knots and talks about this wonderful scarf that's then tied into knots, saying the scarf is the original pure nature, but it ties into knots, so it's not like it's not the scarf anymore, but it's impeded. And then the goal of cultivation is to untie the knots. And in that text he says, unless you understand how the knot is tied, you can't untie it. So it's a really good teaching. I like this metaphor. And so here in this section, Hui Neng then, when he's asked, well, how far back does the teaching go? Where does it come from? He clearly says earlier, it's not mine, I'm just passing it on. He says it goes back to these 7 Buddhas of antiquity and perhaps further, which takes us out of our historical time and space period for sure. Except for Shakyamuni Buddha, these go back. And then he says, the reason why the Buddhas or enlightened beings appear into the world or into worlds is, and this is the line, responding to the needs of the world. And so, in other words, the appearance, the manifestation of the teaching and the teachers is not sort of just automatically happening, but it's happening in response to a need or an illness or a suffering. And that's why, for example, you look at, say, the Bodhisattva Great Compassion, Guan Shi Yin Bodhisattva. Guan means to respond to or contemplate or attend to world Shi Yin sounds. So it means the Bodhisattva who responds to the needs, the cries, the invocations, and the suffering and the wishes of living beings in the world. So this Bodhisattva comes about strictly out of that responsiveness. So what I was going to do tonight in some way was to share with you some stories, and we'll see how much we get through in the time we have left, that you can find narratives like this that are wonderful. For example, chapter 39 of the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is called the Gandavyuha chapter, is the wonderful epic narrative of this pure youth called Sudana, good wealth, who goes in search of enlightenment, how to do it. And he goes through 50 plus, 52, 53 teachers. And each one of these teachers is very different. Some of them don't even look like what we'd call classical teachers. But what's happening here is you're seeing that as the needs of different people in different worlds are such, then those teachers appear to respond to those needs. And so this is very rich. Sometimes it's also said in some of the text that one of the abilities of an enlightened being is to be able to manifest in different forms. It's called huashan, transformation bodies. And so they can take on appearances in voice, and emotions, and all kinds of things. Almost, you think of it sort of theatrically, they can change costumes and appearances to actually manifest appropriately for whatever is needed. I don't know, I think I quoted in here once, it blew me away when I read this section, in the Earth Store Sutra, the Kshitagarbha Bodhisattva Sutra. It says bodhisattvas can manifest through all the forms. They can even manifest as elements of nature, as mountains and valleys and alpine meadows that cause people, when they behold them, to bring forth the mind of purity and awakening. And so it's like, wow. So across the spectrum of both existence and living beings into the material world, it seems as if these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have made resolves and vows to penetrate wherever there is the possibility of teaching and transforming. This is pretty interesting. I don't know about you, but for me, part of my spiritual awakening wasn't so much church or temples or even sutras, it was nature. My first encounters and inspirations came from immersion in nature. As a child in the cold, snowy night of a Wisconsin evening when there wasn't a sound at all, that you could almost hear the stars, and you could hear the absolute silence of you as you're on this planet in empty space. It was a stopper. It was a wake-up. I could relate more, but I mean, was that a bodhisattva? I don't know, and some people say Wisconsin doesn't have them. Or the only ones they have are nature, because, Anyhow, all of you might have had experiences like this, and whether that's that or it's not that, the fact is that things of nature can inspire a deep spiritual inclination or activate it. Just sitting by the ocean for a number of hours, just watching the ebb and flow. Anyhow, so what I wanted to share tonight was, not only does it manifest this way, but the teaching and transforming of a particular teacher then has to match and go across these potentials in order to be effective. So what I was going to share with you tonight to start with was some segments I took from a Thai forest monk who is relatively our time. He is 1870 to 1949. So he passes away 3 years after I'm born, and we never met. So his name is Ajahn Mun. He is considered to be, by many, sort of the reigniter or the founder. He's credited with the establishment of what's called the Thai forest tradition, out of which the monks that come here, when do they come? Every
first Tuesday each month, but now they have the winter retreat.
Okay, so
like on April.
they come here periodically, the first Tuesday every month to have Dharma talks, and right now they're in their rains retreat, which is based on the forest tradition. When the rains come, they go into a meditation retreat for that period. So those monks, Ajahn Amaro and Sumedho, were disciples of Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah was a student of Ajahn Mun. So you can go back. So anyway, Ajahn Mun was in this tradition. And so I just wanted to relate some things. This is from his biography. And it's not in order, so I apologize. I'm going to just read the parts. So one part is that he is living for quite a period of time in a cave in the Thai forest and doing his cultivation. And what his cultivation was subduing himself. So what he was doing was trying to get a handle on his wild mind and bring it under control, so he wasn't just being pulled about by his wild thoughts and fantasies and emotions and memories, but it was able to actually see that these were arising and falling, and we're pulling him along. So he's developed his meditation to what he said, get a handle on his chitta, which is the word he used for the mind that was wandering everywhere. And so part of what he was doing was lecturing to people who came to see him while he was in this cave. But he was also being lectured to. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because when we hear this, part of this is very ordinary and we can understand. And then part of it starts to stretch a little into, well, wait a minute. I'm not going to share with you the part tonight that's really kind of interesting, where he's teaching and transforming monkeys and tigers. Like what? No. So he then, while he's there, takes it on himself to understand what the monkeys and tigers are about. Through his meditation stillness, he's able to figure out their state and able to teach and transform them. But this case, he says very matter-of-factly that he was in the cave, and then a Shravaka Arhat came and delivered a discourse and departed. Who? Well, a Shravaka Arhat is gone beyond this world. It's a being who's passed beyond this world. And he says he humbly received that Dharma teaching. And then the biography relates, he carefully contemplated every aspect of it, isolating each individual point and thoroughly analyzed them all one by one. And as more arhats, Shravaka arhats, came to teach him in this way, he gained many new insights into his practice just by listening to the expositions. And hearing their wonderful discourses increased his enthusiasm for meditation, thus greatly enhancing his understanding of Dhamma. So these are arhats who are associated with the Buddha, Shakyamuni, as part of the early disciples who have now gone off, seemingly, but there they are appearing to him in this cave in Thailand. Acharya Mun said that listening to a discourse delivered by one of the Buddha's arhats, one of the Buddha's arhat disciples, made him feel as if he was in the presence of the Lord Buddha himself, though he had no prior recollection of meeting the Buddha. Listening intently, his heart completely full, he became so absorbed in Dharma that the entire physical world, and including his own body, ceased to exist for him. The citta, the mind alone, existed. And this was a radiant, bright, shining brilliance. And so on. And then it says, and during his lengthy sojourn at this Sharika cave, Acharya Mun entertained many Shravaka arhats and heeded their words of advice, making this cave unique among all places where he'd ever stayed. So ostensibly, he's away from teachers and everything. He's alone meditating in this cave, but these arhats, which were the living disciples of the Buddha, Shakyamuni, now appear to him and give him discourses in which he's absolutely enthralled and listening to it very, very closely. So this is one side. This is interesting. He says, a monk living deep in the forest tends to consider the wild animals living around him, both those inherently dangerous and those that are harmless. He considers them with compassion rather than fear or apathy. He realizes that all animals, dangerous or harmless, are his equals in birth, aging, sickness, and dying. We human beings are superior to animals merely by virtue of our moral awareness, our ability to understand the difference between good and evil, but that's about it. And so he uses this kind of oneness with all living beings as a basis for then relating to the animals that do not harm him, which isn't the case of all those who go into the Thai forest to hang out. Now, then I go to this next part. During his time in this region, I'm just reading from the biography, Acharya Mun taught the local people. So the local people in the villages would come to his cave to make offerings to support him, usually food, medicine, and clothing. Those are the kind of the three. And he would apply all his strength and ability to render them, to bring out their humanity. He passed through some villages where local wise men asked him questions. They asked questions such as, do ghosts really exist? Where do human beings come from? What are the causes of sexual attraction between men and women, since they'd never been taught this? Why are male and female animals of the same species attracted to one another? Where did human beings learn this attraction? And then Acharya Mun. So these are the questions they're asking him. And so he responds at this level to them. There's quite a bit here. I won't But he says, here's what he told them. Most people who go astray do so because they insist on having their own way. So he's talking to the villagers now about stubbornness and having their own way. Without considering whether they're right or wrong, they want to personally dominate everybody else in the family. Something which is impossible to achieve. Such arrogance spreads and rages, singeing everyone in the world until all are scarred. Even worse, they want to exert their influence over everyone else in the world, which is impossible, as trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. Such thoughts and actions should be strictly avoided. If you persist in them, then you will bring about your own downfall. People living together must adhere to and be guided by equitable standards of behavior when dealing with their husbands, wives, children, servants, and co-workers. This means interacting with them in a reasonable, harmonious way. Should others not accept the truth, it's they who are at fault for being so unreasonable, and it is they who will pay the price, and those who adhere firmly to guiding principles and so forth. There's a very straightforward kind of sermon. And so it said, on these occasions when he would teach large numbers of lay supporters, as well as monks living with him, he would allot separate times for giving instructions. So from 4 to 5 p.m. in the afternoon, he would instruct the laity. And then from 5 to 7 p.m., the monks that would come. And then at the end of which they returned to their meditation practice. So what's interesting here is he gives a different teaching according to the needs of who comes. For the monks and nuns, he describes, basically he would teach them about the precepts and how to hold the precepts and be pure in the precepts, how to regulate their eating, basically the training discipline, eating, regulate their emotions, regulate their eating, regulate their possessions to just have enough, not too much and not too little. But even when they had meditation states, he would guide and talk to them about the meditation states, which the villagers did not. The villagers were still just kind of struggling to get along with each other and weren't really doing any meditation. So he said, when the monks came, they would talk about how some of them traveled psychically to heavenly realms, touring celestial mansions until dawn, and only then did their chitta return to their physical body and regain normal consciousness. Others traveled to the realms of the hell and were dismayed by the pitiful condition of the beings they saw, enduring the results of their karma. Some of them visited both the heavenly and the hells to observe the great differences between them. One realm seemed to be blessed with joy and bliss, while the other was in the depths of despair. The beings were tormented by punishment, seemed to have no end. Some of the monks received visits from ethereal beings from various planes of existence, the heavens, for example, or the terrestrial devas. Others simply experienced varied degrees of common happiness coming from the attainment of samadhi. So he would talk to them all about these states. Generally, as he had learned, not to see them extraordinary and special, not to think that because you had these states, you had some achievement, or if you didn't, you weren't achieving. He just says this is normal part of the mind opening up and letting it expand to its natural realm of understanding, and don't get excited about this and don't get dismayed if it's not happened. Now, this part I always find kind of interesting, and it's very so then he said at night, after 7 o'clock, when the monks had left, he would give instructions late at night, and then the terrestrial devas would come. Okay, so the terrestrial devas are the gods, okay? They gather at a respectful distance and listened to his talk while he was talking to the monks. But the monks didn't see them, only he did. And once he'd become aware of them, he called off the meeting quickly with the monks. He entered a samadhi of concentration where he talked privately to the devas. You following? But it's just reported matter-of-factly here. Their reticence on these occasions was due to the profound respect that they had for the monks. Acharya Mun explained that the devas on all levels were careful to avoid passing by the monks' dwellings on the way to see him late at night. Upon arriving, they circled around our Acharya Mun 3 times before sitting down in an orderly fashion. Then the leader, devas of every plane have a leader whom they obey with great deference, he's reporting, would announce the realm from which they came and the aspect of Dharma that they wished to listen to. Now you see the lay people coming out like, I'm fighting with my wife, she's cheating on me, I'm going to kill my neighbor. And he's like, okay, come. And then they circle 3 times, very respectfully sit down and say, we would like to hear about Prajnaparamita. Acharya Mun would return their greetings and then focus his chitta on that aspect of Dharma requested by the Devas. As this Dharma arose within him, as it came through him inspired, he began to talk. And when they had heard and comprehended the Dharma that he delivered, they all said, sadhu, 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 which means? Good, really, really fine. And that sound, he said, echoed throughout the spiritual universe. This exclamation was heard by everyone with celestial hearing, but not by those whose ears were like the handles of a soup pot. I just love that expression. They were heard by everyone who had the basic, it's called the heavenly ear, or that spiritual ability, but not by those whose ears were like the handles of a pot of soup. When his discourse on Dhamma had ended, and the Devas again circumambulated 3 times, keeping him on their right, they returned to their realms in an elegant fashion, very different from we humans. Not even Acharya Mun and his monks could emulate their graceful movements, for there's a great difference between the grossness of our bodies and the subtle refinement of theirs. As soon as the Deva guest retreated to the edge of the monks' area, they floated up into the air like pieces of fluff blown by the wind. And on each visit, they descended in the same manner, arriving outside the monks' living area and then walking the remainder of the way, always very graceful in their movements. They never spoke, making a lot of noise the way humans do when going to see an acharya they revere. This is probably due to the refined nature of their celestial bodies, which restrict them from behaving in such gross manner. Here is an area in which human beings can be considered superior to Deva, talking loudly. And I must say, I don't know about you, I go for walks up in Tilden or wherever. I really like to just get out and walk. And every once in a while I hear the crows or a goose or the squirrels, but incessantly I'll hear people coming. And they're talking, you can hear them coming, and they're just talking. All the time they're walking till they pass. And I listen to it, and it's generally what my teacher used to say about having a discussion how 2 frogs have 4 eyes. It's just blah, 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 blah. And she said, and he said, and I was wondering, she said, he said, you know. So this part I relate to, talking loudly is the ways in which people are superior to Devas. Devas are always very composed when listening to Dharma, never fidgeting restlessly or showing any conceit that could disturb the speaking monk. He usually knew beforehand when the Devas would be arising. For instance, if they were planning to come at midnight, by early evening he was aware of it. On some occasions, he had to cancel a scheduled meeting with the monks for that evening. At an appropriate hour, Ajahn Mun left his walking meditation path and sat entering samadhi until the time approached for the Devas to come. He then withdrew his citta up to the access level, sending out the flow to see if they had arrived. If they had not arrived yet, he continued with his meditation practice before sending out his citta to check again. Sometimes the Devas had already arrived or were just in the process of arriving. At other times, he had to wait, continuing samadhi practice for some time before they came. On rare occasions, when he knew that they would be arriving late, like at 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, he would practice for a while, then take a rest, getting up, readying himself just before the Devas were expected to arrive. I'll finish this. Gatherings of Devas who came to see Acharya Mun did not happen very often, nor in very large numbers while he lived in the Northeast. They came only infrequently to listen in on his talks to monks, but when they did, he would dismiss the monks as soon as he became aware of their presence, entering samadhi very quickly to expound Dharma for the Deva's benefit, which was different than the Dharma he was expounding for the monks' benefit. After he finished and the Devas had departed, he would lie down to rest, arising in the morning as usual to continue his normal routine of practice. Acharya Mun considered receiving Devas a special responsibility. You notice they've done like a special honor, a special responsibility. Since honoring one's promise is very important to him, he is always careful to be punctual. They were likely to be critical of a monk who missed the appointment unnecessarily. Discussions between the devas and the monks are carried on entirely in the universal language of the heart, bypassing the multitude of conventional languages used by human beings and other types of animals. So here, what I'm pointing to in this narrative is he's saying, not only do you teach across the realm of different kinds of beings, but you teach differently to these different kinds of beings, and even the language is different. And so the language or the understanding he was using with animals, which I'm not going to go into, was very different than the ones he did with the monks, and to some extent even the villagers. But then he's saying, at this level, just as certain ears hear this and other ears don't, certain ways to speak this come from a cultivated mind or heart they use here, but it's the same meaning. And so he's saying, they're not like conventional languages by human beings and other types of arising from the chitta, the substance that the acquires turns into questions in the language of the heart, which the inquiring individual clearly understands as if they were words in conventional language. Each word or phrase of the respondent emanates directly from the heart, so the questioner in turn understands the reply perfectly well. In fact, the language of the heart directly conveys the true feelings of the speaker, eliminating the need for explanations to clarify further, as might be required in conventional languages. Verbal communication is also a mechanism of the heart, but its nature is such that spoken words often do not reflect the heart's true feelings. So mistakes are easily made in communicating its true intent. It's very interesting. This incongruity will remain so long as conventional language is used as a surrogate medium for the heart's expression. Since people are unfamiliar with the language of the heart, their hearts cannot avoid using normal speech as a mechanism to facilitate communication, even though it's not very accurate in expressing the heart's true meaning. There's no possible way to solve this common dilemma unless people learn the heart's own language and expose its mysteries. Then I'll finish. Several days prior to his departure from this cave, a group of terrestrial devas led by a mysterious being he first encountered there came to hear a discourse on Dharma. After finishing his discourse, now remember, much of this is in the language of the heart. So if someone were to walk by, they just see the monk in the cave sitting there. And maybe he's moving his lips, but nothing's coming out. They don't see the devas. They don't hear it because they have pot handles, and they have, I guess you'd say, coal for eyes, like the snowman. And so they don't see. They have eyes. This comes from the Bible and from the sutras. They have eyes but do not see. They have ears but cannot hear. And so here he says, after finishing the discourse, he informed them of his decision, say he would take leave of them. He was going to move. Unwilling to see him depart, the large company of devas who were gathered there beseeched him to stay for the sake of their long-term happiness and prosperity. Acharya Mun explained to them just as he had come to that cave for a reason, so too he had a reason for moving on. He didn't come and go slavishly following his desires. Asking for their understanding, he cautioned them against feeling disappointed. He promised that if the opportunity presented itself in the future, he would return. The devas expressed their sincere regrets, showing the genuine affection and respect they had for him and so forth. And so I just wanted to share a part of this. It's a remarkable biography, definitely worth reading. What I was trying to do there was to illustrate responding to the needs, that not only was he responding to the different needs and using different languages, the ability to speak from, he says, from the heart came with his practice of cultivation. It wasn't something that he had, he always had the potential, but he hadn't developed it until he began his practices. And so what you see in this text, it presented in a rather matter-of-fact way. Not only was he the recipient of teachings that nobody else saw when these arhats of the Buddha came to give him lectures, he was also speaking across domains of existence to animals, to people and devas, 3 of the 6 paths. And then you have Asuras and hungry ghosts, and so we have hells, animals, hungry ghosts, Asuras, devas, and people. Those are the 6. So it didn't seem like he was speaking to Asuras. He didn't mention that, nor was he speaking to the hungry ghost. but he was speaking to devas, to people, to animals. So people are, what? So I'm not saying you necessarily have to believe this and not believe it. It's just that this is reported. And these kinds of stories or reports appear both in the formal text, where you see the Buddha crosses his legs, enters samadhi, and then goes into a certain realm to teach Dharma, whether it's Tushita heaven or the Siyama heaven, or even goes into the lower realms to teach and transform. And so here, what you have is somewhat understandable and somewhat stretching how someone with certain cultivated abilities can move across realms that we would recognize. We recognize the animal realm, we recognize the people realm. We're not so sure about the devas. But he doesn't distinguish at all that these are extraordinary or whatnot. These are just the scope of his teaching. So I just wanted to share that with you. I wanted to do a little bit more, but I don't want to push it past 9 o'clock. Any questions on this, first of all? This is available in translation, so you can certainly check it out. One of the things that's very interesting about Ajahn Mun is that he said he was not blessed to have Kalyana Mitra, which means a good and wise advisor. And so he more or less figured a lot of this out on his own. How to cultivate in this way, what were the middle way, what was too much or too little in terms of food or sleep, how to control and regulate his mind and where the mind would wander and so forth. And he said as a result of not having a teacher, and then secondly, not having access to the study of the text, he wasted a lot of time. And one of the comments people made that it's very remarkable that he was able to get so much balance and insight and equanimity and not go off, given that he was doing most of this on his own. It's very rare. And he himself said, if I'd only had the ability to study the text and had a teacher, I could have saved a lot of time and avoided mistakes. And one of the mistakes he talked about here was, as he developed his precept non-outflow practice, his mind became more awake and illumined, and his ability to move into these realms, spiritually what he calls his citta, just happened naturally. But he got so excited about it, going to the hells, going to the spiritual realms and whatnot, that he said, I got caught up in spiritual sightseeing. And so he would, basically like say, I'm going off to the mall. I'm going to check out this theater and that theater and the multiplex theater. I'm going to these stores and whatnot. And then he realized at one point he wasn't really, and this is very important, he wasn't ending his own suffering. He was just going up and down. And he wasn't really getting rid of the finer aspects of his klesha. He was just kind of getting this spiritual rush of sightseeing, is what he called it. And when he realized that these too are like dreams, illusion, bubbles, shadows, through his own kind of intuitive sense, he stopped doing this, and then he said he could start making real progress in his meditation. Otherwise, he would have been caught in a constant loop. And so he became a valuable teacher to others who, in their practices, were encountering these states, and he could very quickly tell them, don't go there. Don't attach to these things. Don't seek these things. Just settle down, settle down. So it's a kind of interesting biography. So questions, comments, anybody? Yes?
I think in a different part of the book,
I'm sorry, my ears are a little...
in another part of the book,
Yes.
he notes that he actually visits the ghost cities.
Ghosts?
Yeah, he describes how the ghosts they have a whole huge social structure, just like humans, and there are good ghosts and bad ghosts, and there are ghost jails, and there are, and so he also, yeah.
So then he goes to ghosts, goes to devas, talks to animals. That leaves asuras. I don't mention asuras, but now we have, and at least they go to the hell. Whether they're communicating in the hells means I don't know. And then from the Seiji realms, which are called the Arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas, he's getting visitations from the Arhats. So but the one thing I stress on this it's like you saying, last week I went to Boston, and then just the other day I was in LA, and now I'm back in Berkeley. So last week I was in the Tushita heaven, then last I was in the hells, and now I'm back in this world. And he says it with the same evenness, nothing special here. So what's being presented here is not something far out extraordinary, but this is the nature of reality. These realms are present at all times, coexisting, mutually interpenetrating without obstruction. Only we, because of our soup pot ears and eyes, to use his metaphor, only see and hear and aware of a limited part of that. Now, sometimes we may have intuitions or senses or even real experiences of these others, but they're fleeting. They're not sustained. And often when they happen, we get excited about them or scared. And he goes beyond this of having those emotions attachment to them. So it's interesting. I'll tell you yes, go ahead.
So if he's doing these really normal things, is he human? Or in the human form, does he become, is he an arhat? We have this great potential as humans to unlock great possibilities, right? So, how would you describe him?
Well, this is a really good question. The first question is, what does it mean to be human? What are the limitations and expanse of that? Was the Buddha human? So how the Buddha was human, yet the Buddha was human. So that's what I mean, the interpenetration. It seems that what we're talking about is a capacity that doesn't have those kinds of limitations. So that at one time one can be human and also be a bodhisattva or a Buddha, I would guess an Ashura. And so, and Buddhas and bodhisattvas can both manifest as human and so forth. So this, what you're talking about is a kind of plasticity of consciousness-directed existence rather than limitations to this. So we have to sort of think about, when he says in this text, with one thought unconfused, and that thought unconfused, you're Buddha. You are Buddha. Not that you become a statue or another being. And in one thought confused, you're just an ordinary being again. And so what's the change? It's not like you've changed your body, but you've changed your awareness and your consciousness. So this is really quite different than we normally think. So I was going to share some more. I wanted to read you, maybe I'll do this next week, a section from the Shurangama Sutra, because one of the points I'll make, maybe go into next week, is that most people set up or get attached, their needs get manifest through two domains. One is emptiness, nothingness, impermanence on one side, or they fall into the other of eternalist, existence, permanence. So these polarities, eternalism, nihilism, existence, non-existence, nihilism, and so forth, these are the poles that usually people's needs get hung up on. So most of the teachings are directed to counteracting that setup. So if you're attached to emptiness, the teaching will then manifest as something about existence. If you're attached to existence, it will manifest as teaching you about impermanence. And so I was going to give some illustrations on that, but I'll save that for next week, because the one in here that's really good is this King Prasanajit in the Shurangama, who is worried about non-existence. He's worried about dying and getting old, and he's sinking into a point of despair. And the Buddha then uses a teaching of something permanent to bring him out and restore him to balance. The other one I wanted to talk about was, I just ran across this. There was a wonderful art exhibit at the city going on, and I grabbed the brochure from it. It's called Shakyamuni Buddha Story. And this is the pamphlet that came on, and the art exhibit is up there. I really like the art illustrations. But this is one story I was going to tell, in which this is a story of the mustard seed and the woman that loses her child. And so just in her condition, she's attached to emptiness and nihilism. Well, the other, she's attached to life, existence, immortality, and so forth. Next week, we'll get to this. But I will tell you one, and you can make what you want of this. This is my own experience. Well, not my own experience with my teacher. I haven't had the experience of giving lectures to the Devas. Yeah, they might be here and they're going, oh God, it's going to end. So when my teacher used to lecture, he would be lecturing in his seat, he would read the Chinese and then give a commentary in Chinese, and then somebody on the side would translate the text into English and would translate the commentary in English. And while they were translating, then he would sit up there, and I always noticed he was doing things. He wasn't just sitting there. Sometimes his mouth was moving, his hands were moving and doing mudras and things like that. And at that time, too, this was a regular event, if he wanted to talk to one of us about something, seldom to praise us, usually to scold us, he would just say, you know, come on up. And you'd come up and somebody would be translating, and then he would be there doing his thing, and you'd sort of have to wait. And then he would talk to you, or he'd turn to the translator and say, no, you got that wrong, even though he didn't know English. And sure enough, so he was multitasking, I guess. And so I came up, I remember coming up one time, and he was there. He had asked me to come up about something, and I was waiting for him, and he was doing things with his hands. The same thing he would do often when he would give the three refuge ceremony. And so when he was done, I was really brash and bold. I said, what were you doing? And he kind of looked at me, and he said, I was giving the three refuges. I said, like, to who? Because I didn't see anybody. And he looked at me, and he said, to a hungry ghost. And I thought, oh. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he looked at me again, he said, well, this hungry ghost was very agitated and distraught because of the state of hunger that's associated with their condition. So he said, before I could give the three refuges, I gave him a burrito. And then he went back, and I was like, and that was the exchange. It was sort of like, and again, speaking languages appropriate and whatnot. When I took refuge, I wasn't given a burrito. I had to bow and bow and bow, and then the refuge was given. I was given medicine for my arrogance, which was a lot of bowing before I got it. The hungry ghost got a burrito, and then a teaching. But you think about it, in terms of expedient means, it's exactly what needed to do to get the agitated, distraught state calm enough to receive the three refuges because hungry ghosts are hungry. And so the burrito, I didn't push it past that point. I think, okay, I'll think about this one. I'm sorry, do you going to ask something?
Did he actually say burrito?
Burrito. Oh. It was a burrito. Mm-hmm.
So I'm still stuck back on the bodhisattvas where will appear in the world when they're needed, which of course makes me think we really need some now. But is that literal, like in human form? Because here we are also talking about these coexisting beings that are not in any form, in which case aren't they kind of always there, and then how would they appear when they're needed?
So if you look for example, the Avatamsaka Sutra is the most exquisite text describing the path of the Bodhisattva and the manifestations that the Bodhisattvas take on and the actions and activities they do across all realms of existence, from the hells up to the realm of the sagely and so forth. And what's described is that they can appear both as human beings, in animal form, in deva form, in hell being form, as ghost, and so forth, working in those realms and conditions, among thieves, among beggars, among rich people, among kings. They take on and manifest a form and take on and manifest a teaching that's appropriate in an expedient way to address the particular needs and knots across all those realms. So when you say we could use a lot of bodhisattvas now, the opposite might be maybe we have them. And maybe if we didn't have them, we would really be in a dire strait. So, the thing about them is they blow their cover if they say, I'm a bodhisattva. If they're politicians or prostitutes or robbers or bankers or anyway, their point of working is to, it's say, they have one of their vows is to manifest similarity in deeds and kind. So they appear in the manifestation of who they're working with. They don't look different. And yet the quality of what they're doing keeps things moving forward. They make changes and transformations that make it easier for people to cultivate and realize their spiritual nature. How this works out, but there's good going on, right? There's good music going on. Who's making that good music? There's good poetry coming that inspires and touches. Occasionally there's a good politician who runs, There's good discoveries being made that make humanity's existence, and so forth. There's people that you encounter that do things that bring out your spiritual, who are they, right? And again, because we have Frosty the Snowman eyes and soup pot ears, we don't think that they are necessarily anybody. And the text says they don't wait to be asked and they don't hang around for thank yous. So again, what they do is rather invisible to accept those who know and see. So I'm repeating what the texts say and what I've been taught. Do I know and see this directly? Yes and no. Yes and no. When we are on our bowing pilgrimage, we certainly ran into some extraordinary beings across a realm, and often afterwards we would check with our teacher, and he would close his eyes and say, oh yeah, that was a ghost. Oh yeah, that was a bodhisattva. And because what happened in the exchange was such that it was like, I got to figure out, this wasn't what it seemed. What was going on here? And then I didn't know what it were. So, more things to heaven and earth than I dreamed of in your philosophy. But I don't want to push this too far. I just wanted to bring it out tonight and saying this one line of text, responding to needs, is a very deep theme in these teachings, and it's manifested across all realms of existence. And that's where, when you read the sutra text, you may say, oh wow, that seems to be extraordinary or supernatural, but realize it's along a continuum of a principle of being able to reach across and teach and transform living beings wherever they are. So, okay? We got two of our friends are leaving for Germany. When are you guys going? Tuesday. Going to another realm. Well, we'll miss you. I've been seeing you on Friday night for quite a while. You're both going together off to Germany. Well, good travels. Hope things work out. Come back anytime. Everybody else is coming back next week, as far as you know? Okay. We'll do the announcements?
Just one short. So tomorrow, as usual, 7:30 p.m. Will be the lecture here. Dharma Master Jean Fosher will lecturing on the Infinite Light Sutra. So please come if you're interested. And we have daily meditation twice a day, 6:15 to 7:15 in the morning, 5:15 to 6:15 afternoon, and our Forest Sangha friends monks will start coming in April after they finish their winter retreat. So more information you can find on our website, Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, berkeleymonastery.org. I'm right.
Okay.
May every
of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassion